And we really wanted to get together today to talk about all things celebrity and influencer. We'd really like to cover topics looking at what, if anything, has changed since the pandemic, looking at best practice, and also doing a bit of kind of future gazing, seeing what's coming up, any trends that we should all be aware of when we're developing our campaigns. So luckily for me, we've got 3 experts here to talk about all of that. We're going to be running it as a kind of panelist discussion. So I've got a few topics that I'll run through, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A, as Kyrie said. So yeah, feel free to put those in the chat. I've already had some questions submitted, so I'll run through some of those first as well. But first of all, I'd love to introduce our panelists. So I will start by introducing Paul Cullen. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Beth. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. So Paul started his career at the BBC. He's also worked at the RNLI and Macmillan. He's a talent relations specialist and now runs his own consultancy. So thank you for joining us today, Paul.
The delight, thanks.
Next, Paul, by the way, also has scaffolding being removed, but he's convinced them to have a break over lunchtime. Clever Paul.
Yes, I'm hoping they won't come back until at least 1 o'clock.
I was not so quick off the mark. Next up, I would love to introduce Martin Sibley. So Martin, hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi Beth, hi everyone.
Martin's also worked in the third sector, and he is an influencer in his own right. Martin co-founded the agency Purple Goat, which is a specialist disability social marketing agency, so he brings that expertise with him today. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Last but no means least, Dom Smales. So Dom founded digital marketing agency Gleam back in 2010, which was before all of us were really talking about things like influencers. He's an absolute expert in digital first talent and is currently setting up his new venture as we speak. So hi, Dom. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So without further ado, I'll crack on with some of our topics. We've got a 1 p.m. kind of hard finish, so I'm sure we'll battle through. The first thing I'd like to talk about, really, the first topic, is very much looking at the current sort of state, I guess, of affairs when it comes to working with celebrities and influencers. So much has changed for us all as communicators since the pandemic started. And I'm curious as to whether the same is in your field, in your guys' field. Paul, I might start with you on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly. So I guess one of the things that's changed is we've all gone online. And from a charity perspective, as I'm sure all the communication people will know, fundraising are kind of going, we've got this brilliant idea, but unless we get a celeb to front it, it's unlikely to fly. So whereas celebrity, so there's a number of celeb managers like me throughout the charity sector, and where we go out and we've got our contacts, and some celebs are already attached to charities. Almost everything has now got a celebrity request attached to it. So what I found is that similarly to the rest of us, we're all kind of getting used to operating in a new way. A lot of talent are freelance, so they've kind of gone from having their jobs, and doing what they do taken away, and the requests from charities have just increased. So what a lot of talent agents have done is say, actually, my talent are only going to work with charities where we've got established relationships. So in some sense, it's become a lot harder to kind of crack through. But then the thing that kind of is the most important thing is understanding why you're going to that person in the first place, and having an authentic reason for approaching them, so that their agent will kind of go, do you know what, this means so much to them, or it's so there's great synergy with them, that actually I will pass that on, and then let them decide whether it's something that they can support with.
Thank you, Paul. Martin or Dom, do you have any other experience or anything to add to that? How do you think things have shifted since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, I guess a couple of points. You sort of gave that kind introduction, Beth. I've sort of spanned working in the third sector I left Scope, the disability charity, 10 years ago. So when I was at Scope, there wasn't so much of this world of influencer marketing, but very much Scope did and still do work with celebrities and definitely now more so influencers. In terms of the marketing agency that I started last year with a focus on disability, I think we found sort of two almost trends have been enhanced by the pandemic. The sort of disability of the back of diversity and inclusion obviously been a really big topic for all the reasons that we know through the last 12 months. And then, yeah, I think with being locked down and not having as much events and in-person marketing activity, I think influencer marketing has really, and general digital marketing has seen, various budgets put across into that space. So, with the agency we've started, we've had extreme growth just because of those two factors, really.
Brilliant.
And reflecting on what it's like from purely a talent perspective, since the start of the pandemic, basically their inboxes have become even busier because everybody has seen that, how do I reach an audience? I can't use this medium and I can't use that medium because of the pandemic. Online volume of people online has gone through the roof, as you can imagine. And of course, everybody's first thought is, let's talk to an influencer about getting our message across then. So it's gone a bit mental for them. And so I'm not at Gleam Futures anymore. I've exited Gleam Futures. Gleam is it does have a marketing division, but it's not a marketing company. It's a talent company. So they are underwater basically with inboxes, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Amazing. So as you guys have been saying, it's all essentially got much busier, I think, across the board. What do you think our key considerations should be then as charities, as comms people, when we're coming to approach influencers, talents, celebrities, their agents, agencies that work with them? What should the key considerations be when we're thinking of trying to set up that partnership? And is it different, do you think, across the different types of talent that we've spoken about already? Dom, I'll probably come to you first on that, if that's okay. What should our key considerations be?
Sure. And I think I'm probably just echoing something that Paul said a minute ago, is that the number one, and if you had three considerations that you're thinking about when approaching an influencer, and I'm assuming it's a bit the same for celebrities now as well, and the number one, which takes up 90% of the bandwidth that it should take up of those three, is it relevant? Has this person mentioned this charity, campaign, concern, etc. before? Otherwise, you're just going to be, if you're going after a talent of any size, then you're going to be just in a massive pond, a very small fish in a big pond in terms of the inbox. And if you're going to an influencer who is got a really quiet inbox, then I don't think you run the risk of having a really inauthentic campaign just because they want to do anything rather than the right thing.
Martin, would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, with that disability lens, I think it's very applicable to the different causes across the not-for-profit sector. It really echoing what Dom said as well. It's that, starting with the basic marketing principles: who's the audience, what's the message you're trying to get to them, and then you come in with who are the right influencers or celebrities to do that. And I think when we look at the influencer space, there's some quite interesting dynamics where there are influencers within the communities. Like I've been involved in a charity that's for my particular disability, which is spinal muscular atrophy. And there's actually quite a lot of people that have got good audiences on Instagram and TikTok with that condition. So the older style of beneficiary being separate from marketing, separate from fundraising, I think now there's an opportunity that there are influencers amongst the community that charities are there to serve. So I think there's some quite interesting strategic changes that we should be looking towards now. Yeah,
absolutely. Paul?
I think we're all storytellers. So, as been said, it's about finding why that person would be telling your story. What you're looking for through someone, a profile, whether they're digital first, whether they're a traditional celeb, is actually they want to be amplifying what you're trying to say. So I think for the older types of us who would say, you know, people would go to the opening of an envelope, that kind of period has sort of gone, because not only are producers and editors and you know, the outlets that we use, so across media, so whether it's broadcast, online, or, you know, in print, they're looking for that journalistic, you know, what's the story here? But actually audiences have become quite cynical about why celebs are being put forward for a cause. And I think when you bring digital first into it, you're looking at actually they're very much more around curating their own content and, you know, and their own narrative. And traditional celebs have kind of learned, I think, from that. So when you go to an agent, the first thing they'll kind of go is, why me? You know, and one of the things I found in working in the charity sector, which I've been in since 2007, is a lot of people go, right, we'll have a celeb here. You know, a celeb will make this brilliant. Well, actually, no, it won't. The celeb should be the cherry on the cake. I do have a terrible other phrase that I use that doesn't go down very well, but you know, essentially, if you look at what you're doing and it can't stand up on its own without a celeb or without an influencer, then it isn't the right thing that you should be doing. And as Dom says, you know, you need to, if you're going after an influencer that isn't connected to what you're doing and doesn't have that following and doesn't have the profile that you want, then actually the amplification that they're going to give you is not what you're going to be looking for. So it's really important to kind of understand before you go out. It's like, okay, so what's our objective? As Martin said, you know, who's the audience? What are we trying to say? And actually, if we go to that person and their agent opens our email, as you know, hundreds of emails a day, what's going to pique their interest? Or say, oh, my client and I have spoken about this. I know that that's an interest that they have. So it's worth me investigating a bit more. So it's understanding what the story is that you're trying to tell, firstly.
That's really helpful advice. Thank you. I think, yeah, especially good for us all to think of the campaign in its own right before thinking of any talent that could potentially support it.
I would say and the one thing that often happens in terms of celeb involvement or influencer involvement is it's often an afterthought. So actually start include whoever manages your talent or your talent conversations from the very outset, because at least then you'll be able to weave that through your entire program and integrate their involvement, rather than just kind of going, here's what we're doing, and you give it, if you've got a celeb manager or you've got a talent specialist, and going, you know, who can you get to support this? Actually, if you build that in, then actually you have the opportunity to engage with people earlier on and say, and digital first particularly, you wouldn't give them and say, just put this out. You'd say to them, actually, what would you do if I gave you this kind of brief in a way, and how would you be able to manage that? So particularly with things like TikTok, I've just asked someone I know on TikTok to do something for a campaign I worked on, and he came back and said, you know what, I've thought about it, but I can't authentically do this, and I don't want to, it was a Mental Health Awareness Week, I don't want to mess it up, so I'd rather just not do it. And you know, so it's involving people from early conversations to put into your planning, so that you think about, actually, how could we use them properly?
I think it's probably key to point out as well that these days you mustn't think about your influencer or celebrity as being your reach. You think about it as being your authentic content, story, interesting take on the charity or the disability. Or there is an influencer for every subject matter you could possibly dream up right now. As Martin pointed out, there's some really interesting people that specifically suffer with his disability, etc., and they would make brilliant ambassadors because they know what they're talking about. It's 100% authentic. But don't, from a PR perspective, get put off by, well, they haven't got enough followers, so that might not be the right person, or they're not famous enough, or whatever. It's perhaps then about making sure, going back to that, make sure they're in the strategy all the way through. Rely on the channels and the strategy that you have, and use the influencer in this instance to add interesting, creative, a real authentic story to tell, but use your other normal channels that you would usually do to go and, you know, get your message across. But it's just much more effective with the right people on board.
Yeah, we've been able to do some quite interesting things with paid media. So you can actually model audiences based on the influencer's profile and their audience. So you can get that scale and reach through paid media. But as you say, Dom, you need that authentic storytelling, that content to be right so that it actually carries well on social.
Yeah, that really, well, I think that's a big part of the future. Although Facebook are having a bit of a disagreement with Apple at the moment, so they're changing things around, but it does favor the creator, so the creator's engagement becomes more effective. I might be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, someone, but I think the creator's engagement becomes more effective. But then it's much more about how do we make more audience with our paid media like the audience that this creator is connecting with. So you can do some really interesting things with that.
Yeah, really interesting ways of integrating across the comms mix. We've touched on it briefly, but in terms of the third sector generally, inclusivity and diversity is huge for charities, and should really be at the core of all of our communications campaigns. But how can we effectively promote that in our talent partnerships? What should we be looking to do? And Martin, I'll probably come to you first, if possible.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the first step is just being aware that it's needed. And I think that's where we've got a lot further the last year or two, and that's charity sector and general private sector brands alike. And then at that point, I think it's about representation. So it's about staff networks of different groups. It's about sort of steering groups, speaking to different communities, having everyone at the table, really. But I think in the end, if you've got representation and that awareness in the first place, the rest will follow on much more naturally and easily.
Thank you. Paul or Dom, do you have any further insights on that?
I mean, I'd agree. My scaffolders are back off lunch. Awareness is a great thing. I think also action. We have talked about inclusivity and diversity and things within the charity sector for an awful long time, and it's I think the past kind of 12-18 months have sort of shown a change in actually people willing to take action. But it does, awareness is the first thing, but we just need to kind of talk to those people like you would, donors and the people that we're trying to get to fund the charity. Actually, don't be scared to go out to people and I don't know if Martin would agree, and reach out to them and say, look, we don't, we want to talk to this audience, but we don't understand how to talk to them because it's not our, it's not our bag really. So are you happy to come on board and give us some guidance? I think that a lot of us sometimes worry that to say, actually, I don't know about that, or I don't know how to approach that person in the right way, or I don't know how to kind of articulate that language, rather than say, can you help me? We'll go, oh, we'll kind of muddle along with it and actually probably get it wrong. Whereas it'd be much better for us to go out, reach out to people and say, look, we want to do this, but we don't know how. Can you help us?
I would only add that it helps also, and I think that this is going to be a major factor in the future, to make sure that at your team's level, there is an enormous diversity and inclusion strategy there, so that when it comes to the curation and suggestion and outreach for talent, that is part of the whole culture of what you do with talent and influencers and so on and so forth. Because I think there's a danger, as there is in traditional entertainment as well, of it always being the usual suspects kind of thing. You don't get any diversity and inclusion because it's always somebody who doesn't have awareness of the entire ecosystem and what the world is actually like out there. They'll go, oh, just pick Ant and Dec. Yeah, just Ant and Dec, yeah, or whoever, who's on an ITV primetime show all the time. So I think that's important. So education all the way through the process.
And we found that influencers, the general model is that sort of content creation, amplification, comm strategy. But we found really powerful models where sort of ambassadors can also be for insights as well. So you can work with influencers to get that representation and insight.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way of doing it, and comes around to your guys' point earlier, as well as of looking at talent sort of as part of that campaign creation, and almost from the strategy and insight phase, but knowing that it's a stream that you want to use at some point as part of the campaign that you're doing, and keeping that considered from the very start. And like you say, Martin, perhaps working with influencers to give you some insight that you just don't have already within your team, which would be a really interesting way of planning moving forward. One of the topics that's come up a few times, and I think even speaking to you over the past few weeks, is the issue of payment. And I think there are differing views on payment, so I'd be really interested to hear those views today. Paul, let's start with yourself from a sort of, I guess, a more traditional and mainstream celebrity point of view.
My steadfast is you never pay for celebrity or talent support. It's a risk not only to the charity and to their reputation, but it's also a risk to the celebrity and their reputation. When we were chatting, I kind of, for those of you who remember Binkygate and Bernardo's, and that being the Bernardo shop being a commercial proposition, still didn't wash and made it front page of the Sun because Binky had got paid $3,000 for an appalling Instagram post. So the other thing people say, well, if we pay, we guarantee them. Well, you don't really, because they might get run over by a bus. So it's kind of like, how do you start costing it up? Do you if you start paying one, how do you pay another? And it just becomes a real mess. But really, it's a big risk to the reputation of the charity and the celebrity, because donors don't want to think that their money is being spent on advertising, let alone giving a celebrity where they perceive them to already be really rich, which isn't always the case, to be taking money out of a granny putting £1 in a pot outside the supermarket. So never pay is what I would say.
I would agree with that. It's just not something we'd ever done or would do, or when I was at Gleam, or anything we'd ever done or would do. Because also the whole, like, the ambassadorship from a talent to a charity is, and always should be, about they want to do it, and it's the only reason they're doing it is because they believe in your cause and want to help. So that's where it starts and ends for me.
Yeah, it's not in any way disagreeing, it's just a different perspective. So like, employment of disabled people has always been quite low. A lot of the big disability charities have tried to get the right talent in terms of recruitment talent in the charity, but there's still more to go. And there's also lots of disabled people that, their job is like freelancer, consultant, and some of that is like being an influencer around creating content. So I think there's that sort of grey area, shall we say, where I know that lots of people with a disability that are labelled influencers, it almost is right that they're paid for their expertise and their time just the way the CEO of a charity or the paid salaried staff of a charity are. So as I say, it's not against what you both just said, but it's a newer area that there are times I think it is appropriate to pay for influencers, with an example like the one I just gave.
There's an interesting point that Carly's just made. Sorry to talk over you there for a second, which is that when there's a big corporate partner involved as well. So there is scenarios, I guess, whereby there's a corporate, part of the corporate's strategy is working with charity X, and the ambassador is involved in the 360-degree campaign for that brand or corporate or whatever it is, and part of that is helping the charity out. I think that's another anomaly.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, it kind of and tied into the corporate sponsorship thing, you can, if a sponsor wants to pay, or a high-level donor wants to pay for Kylie to perform, you could quite justifiably say, that's coming out of their own money. It's ring-fenced from what, it doesn't impact on the fundraising. And what Martin said, if somebody is doing a particular job, then there should be consideration for pay. The difficulty becomes when it's perceived that they're doing something because it's not, you know, they're doing it something because of their profile, as opposed to being a consultant. Or so they're Ant and Dec involved because they're on the telly and they're famous. You know, if they're taking money from a charity, that looks really bad. So I think what Martin said is it is difficult when you've got people who you're expecting them to offload their expertise without anything in return. But when you're putting someone out as a spokesperson or an advocate for a charity, where it's perceived that actually they're doing that out of their philanthropic, you know, purpose, and then it turns out that they're being paid, then you're running into a risk of real, you know, the Daily Mail. Literally, we did something when I was at Macmillan, and the Daily Mail like, "Hey, are you gifting these people? Who else are you gifting?" And you know, and it was kind of an Insta story, and it was a freebie from a corporate client, you know, corporate supporter. But really, they're so on it, and many of the people who work in celeb or in press offices, you'll know that you get a phone call saying, "Have you paid that celeb? How much are you paying them? Why are they involved?" and stuff like that. So it's about, you know, that real distinction between, is somebody doing a job, or are you putting them out as a spokesperson because of their profile? And you know, I think there's a definition between there, or a definitive difference.
Yeah. Thank you. It's definitely a really interesting topic. The last of our kind of, I guess, wider discussion topics, and we've had loads of questions in, so thanks so much. I'll make sure we've got good time for them. But it's really to get your guys' views on what's next, what's coming up, what should we be aware of, planning for, considering when we're looking at future campaigns. Dom, shall I start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really interested in subscription economy now, after working at Gleam for so long, founding Gleam, being solely concerned with the advertising funded world of social media and talent. Now I think it's interesting to look at what happens when talent communicate on subscription platforms like OnlyFans, Patreon, Twitch. And I think there's a really interesting charity element that could play there, i.e. everything that talent do on subscription platforms has a cost attached to it, mainly. Just like, you know, Netflix's model is the same, and so on and so forth, as well as the big broadcasters with their streaming subscriptions. And I think charities could really benefit. In my new project, we've just launched a talent on OnlyFans, Next Love Islander or something like that, and a part of her content narrative is about supporting charities. So the content that she publishes on her subscription page will be for a specific charity only on particular days or weeks in a month. And I just think that's a channel that you guys could benefit for, as it only will grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's Cameo as well. I don't know if we discussed that, but Cameo, for those that are uninitiated, is you pay a celebrity to give you a personal message, wish your mate a happy birthday, or I paid Nigel Farage to give my mother-in-law a message about Brexit, because we had a family disagreement about it. So I tapped into Nigel Farage, paid him 70 quid or something like that, and he delivered a message straight to my mother-in-law, which I was quite
that is brilliant.
Yeah. Anyway, it was slightly sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek message. Nigel didn't know that though. But how could you use platforms like that for charities? I see a lot of A-list celebs doing Cameo messages, you know, launching Cameo channels and delivering personalized messages, but purely for charity, because and they earn a lot of money for the charity in that way.
Oh, brilliant.
I'd you know, I think that area is really fascinating, and Amaze have raised loads of money for people. For me, kind of being more the traditional, I just think it's about integration and really thinking about integrating your talent, whether it's digital first, whether it's traditional, but really thinking about, okay, some organizations are huge and it's quite difficult to kind of navigate through them. Others are smaller. But if you start thinking about, can we use a celeb for the traditional thing, like pitching up to an event when they happen again, or taking part in an event, through to the advocacy and talking with credibility about your charity, but also remembering that celebs are, rich people like celebs, or celebs are, you know, have corporate partnerships with people or sponsorships with people? You know, is there some way that the charity can access their networks that way? And then also, I suppose, with things like Cameo and that type of thing, is not necessarily thinking of celebs for a philanthropic personal donation, but actually, can you leverage their support in some way? So an example I have is when I was at the RNLI, I did something with Rupert Grint, and his fan base in America kind of grabbed hold of this and thought it was great, and donated loads of money to the RNLI for his, it was $22 because it was his 22nd birthday. And so out of that, not only do you get the fundraising income, but also it becomes a story. So it just gives you a bit more to talk about, and kind of amplify what you're trying to talk about and your charity. So it's thinking much more integrated rather than just, you know, let's get them on the TV and that's the end of their sort of use, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really just building on the points there. I think, you know, the stuff I said earlier about how you can have a new type of ambassador that can give insights on different topics, as well as the more traditional, so I don't even know if the word is traditional yet, with kind of digital influencer marketing. You know, it's still really on this rapid rise the last couple of years, isn't it? But I think there's just going to be a lot more of how influencers represent really, really niche audiences. We did an activation with Leonard Cheshire Disability last year, and that involved a group of disabled influencers all activating in the same week. It was a campaign. So I think there's that way of, you know, traditionally there wasn't really a disability media channel. There were older school print magazines, but it was very hard to track and know if they were really reaching the audience it was intended for. And I think with social media, we know we can track and optimize everything. There's a lot of data and performance that we can look to. So yeah, I think with diversity, with data, with all these new strategies being more holistic, it's just going to be exciting to see it all unfold.
Really interesting, thank you. And Martin, you've actually linked perfectly to the first question that I had submitted prior to this event, so thanks. But the question was around measurement, and what should we be measuring now beyond just awareness? You know, surely there's more that we can be doing to show the value of these partnerships.
I think for me, it's about sentiment and engagement are the big metrics. We did a great campaign with Tesco a couple of months ago where disabled influencers talked about changing places toilets, and the sentiment of non-disabled shoppers on that was ridiculously high through a Nielsen study that we did to show the uplift in sentiment. And that generally any measurement of influencer marketing is engagement, because as we said, there's ways to get scale, but if there's no engagement, it's not powerful enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to go for, I'm quite simplistic in my approach. Similar to PR, some things aren't that easy to measure. But if you are looking at, you know, looking at what your call to action is, and is there some way of personalizing that for the talent you're reaching out to, is a good way. So, you know, if we ask somebody to post on social, we won't necessarily know their metrics and how many responses they have. Although Stephen Fry retweeted me the other day, and I've had 250,000 impressions, which is amazing. So I can tell that because it's my tweet. But you know, if it's a call to action, so if it's a campaign, you want people to sign up, can you give a specific link to the talent so that what they're posting is different to what the other route people are getting to, and looking at, you know, sort of what can your digital teams provide to you that actually give you some measurement? Because traditional, you know, column inches measurement and all that sort of stuff, I think is still, as much as I know about PR, it's still, you know, everyone's talking about it, but there's no guarantees of, you know, AVEs being what they should be and all that sort of stuff. So that, and sometimes trying to get a sense of what that would cost in the commercial world, which isn't as easy. But you know, I've worked with people in the past and they say, well, actually, if I was to charge this out to a corporate partner, it'd be 20 grand. So sometimes you can use that, but that tends to be a bit more anecdotal, I think.
Thank you. Dom, do you have anything to add to that on measurement?
No, I don't think I do, other than those things. I said rather not very sophisticatedly, just money, how much money each channel can raise.
Yeah,
basically, if that was something, especially with the subscription thing in mind also.
Yeah, definitely. I think linking it through to fundraising, really important measure. Another question we've had through is around contracts. Should you be asking celebs, digital talent for contracts if they're going to be working with you? I think especially bearing in mind what we've been talking about in terms of, you know, this sort of partnership, when it's just about profile should be unpaid, should you then be talking to that person about having a contract with them, agreeing what they're going to do?
I mean, I don't have contracts with people. I don't really. What you need is almost a letter of agreement, or some, you know, and that, I say letter of agreement, but it can be something, an email or something, where you just set out the expectations of each party. The problem with people saying, well, we want to contract, you know, we want to do a contract, is they're donating their time. So if a job did come in, you know, and it's their business, and they had to break that contract, as a charity, you're not going to take them to court, because that would, you know, could you imagine a charity saying, oh, I'm taking Lorraine Kelly to court because she didn't turn up to my barbecue? It's so what you really want, a kind of a terms of reference of what the engagement might be, and that can be, you know, fairly informal, but just sets out kind of the expectation. The other reason why you wouldn't have a contract with somebody over you know, a period of time is their careers are so unpredictable that even if they said, right, I'm giving you the 15th of September, I'm going to do something. I've had something in the past where it was like, it's in the diary, they won't change it. The BBC recruited them for a job, and they had to say, well, actually, I'm contracted to the BBC. Even if they had a contract with us, the BBC would probably have won out, because, you know, it's their work, whereas charity is them supporting and a philanthropic kind of gift, I suppose.
Yeah. And presumably a kind of terms of reference should also be two ways. So it should be about the charity saying what we will do, as much as it's about the talent.
Which is why it's really good to start introducing planning into talent very early on, because then you can, you know, if I went to a talent agent, I tend to go with a bit of a shopping list, and it's like, you know, for their involvement, it needs to have, you know, if they don't agree to this, then there's no point in being involved. But actually, if they agree to this, can they also agree to this, this, and this? And they'll say, do you know what, I don't like that. That's not what I do. That's not what my talent do. I've had people kind of go, they don't mind doing that, but they'd never pitch up to that. Like, so, and it is two-way, and it should be a two-way conversation, which is why it's good to get a talent specialist in to kind of build those relationships, and, you know, and have a conversation. You know, we're all adults, so it should be a professional relationship that you have with the talent and the agent, so that they can say, actually, my client would never do that, and you kind of go, if they won't do that, is there a possibility of doing this? It's about not being too scared to ask, because the worst they can say is no. If you don't ask the question, how are they going to say yes to it?
Yeah, and that actually links really well into another question that we had, which was about agents and gatekeepers, essentially. And, you know, I think people have been in situations where we think, God, there's really great natural synergy between our charity, that person, you know, they've spoken about it before, we can tell that they're into the topic, they're passionate about it, but I cannot get past their agent. So have you got any advice, I guess, for actually getting that contact through when you are clear that there's been so much kind of legwork done into the research to make it that it would be an authentic partnership? How do we get past?
The key thing, I'm sorry, kind of coming in first, but persistence. You know, if you don't get a response from that agent, also understanding the difference between an agent, a publicist, a manager. I had exactly that kind of example where there was an actress who I was like, this is so relevant. She's spoken about this. It's so relevant. And for whatever reason, her publicist didn't get in touch with me, and her agent, who's a tough cookie, came back and said, oh yeah, I understand why, you know. So it's about persistence, and don't be afraid to doorstep. I've done that as well. But really, you know, sometimes it's making sure you're framing it right. And as much as your research backs up why you're approaching them, actually is that coming through really quickly? When an agent's like, what's the top line? You know, what do I need to know? How long, you know, what they're asking, how long is it going to take, and when is it? So but persistence, I would suggest.
I would second that from a talent perspective. And also, it's a really good point and a good idea about making sure you know who the team is around the talent that you want to talk to. So who's the publicist? Because I can't stress enough the absolute barrage of communication that comes through to a manager or anybody that's got their email address mentioned on the talent's Instagram kind of thing, because there's just hundreds a day, basically. And there was a stage at Gleam, I know, that the talent managers didn't want to do meetings because they were getting an email a second, and if they were in a meeting for an hour, they knew how many emails that they would get back to when they got back to their desk. So it gets ridiculous. But if, as a charity with a really relevant conversation to have, you can work out who the team around the person is and then get some FaceTime with them, then it's much more likely to arrive into an environment with the talent where it will be properly considered, rather than just a wash of emails. And if it's through the publicist rather than the manager, then great, because it might not be that it's not relevant, it's just that it's just not getting through, basically.
Thank you. And another question that sort of links to this is whether we should be considering making approaches differently depending on the type of talent. So from, you know, we've spoken here quite a lot about the kind of mainstream celebrity type talent, but what about those, you know, micro influencers, campaigning champions, potentially some of the people that you've spoken about a bit more, Martin? Should we be approaching those people in a different way?
I guess it's sort of back to that when we're talking about the pay side, just that sensitivity, because I think you can understand where that whole topic comes from, is disabled people wanting to feel valued for their expertise. And I think that there's just that empathy to those sorts of situations, and not to offend or upset anyone inadvertently by presuming that it would be for free. I mean, in the end, it's just good old common sense, isn't it? It's, you know, having good relationships, having a good brand, yeah, being persistent, and, you know, just if you've got that empathy and compassion to the people you're talking to, I think only good will come of it.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to some of the questions that have come through in the chat now. So one of our earlier ones was actually about how we should consider working with celebrities and influencers as more of a patron rather than just for a particular campaign. And that was from Alice Clark. So it's about connecting to celebrities on a longer term basis.
I mean, I can start off again. It's like any other relationship, they develop over time. So understanding, you know, what we've said before about why you're going to that person, why they would want to be involved, but also not expecting too much too soon. If you look at how your high value team work with high value donors and that sort of thing, there's a lot of similarities between kind of what high level donors and the journey that they can take sometimes to what celebs can take. So it's about kind of developing that relationship over time. Sometimes, often, you know, that's kind of the true way of working, is just getting to know them, getting to know why they're involved, and then moving on to patron. I mean, if you look at something like UNICEF and the Goodwill ambassadors and that type of thing, you know, they don't appoint Goodwill ambassadors for about 7 years. You have to have committed to the charity and to their, you know, to their campaigns over a long period of time before you're considered a Goodwill ambassador. So it's a good model to look at, in that, you know, people will take time to get to know you, it's about fitting and understanding what you want from them. If you want a patron for a short-term event, you know, or a short-term campaign, that can sometimes work, but really it's about developing the relationships so that you're both talking the same language and understand what you're trying to get from each other, I suppose, and working on that basis.
Yeah, it's long-term is always, and it's the same with with brands, any brand, that the one-off tweet, the one-off Instagram, the one YouTube video just get lost in the quagmire now, and also just saps authenticity and credibility. So I think it should always be about building a relationship with whoever it is you want to work with, so that it becomes part of the narrative quite naturally, because that's the magic powder in this whole space, and work it that way.
Yeah, I think when we talked about the future, that's going to be a big one, isn't it? That it really is not just the transactional, and even what we say in the charity sector, and it may not be for money, but just not that one-off thing, but that longer-term relationship's going to be more and more important for the success on all sides of the fence.
Thank you. Another question that's in the chat that's I'll just read out, and this is from Sophie Fisher. So Sophie, tell me if I don't get this right, but she's asking, what advice would you have for seeking influencers to support your cause when your target audience isn't specific? We work with all young people aged 15 to 29. We sometimes find it hard to find a suitable influencer when beneficiaries are quite a general audience. Any views on that?
It's about the subject, the content, then I would have thought at that point. So even though your audience is broad, the charity will have a particular subject matter to talk about, and it's finding someone that's also talking about that subject matter.
So for Sophie, it's a young cancer awareness charity, awareness and intervention based. So you would say look for an influencer who's already spoken on that topic, or suffered with cancer and been vociferous about it, or has a part of their story that they're putting across online in their life has been touched by cancer. And then if you're overly concerned about audience, then it's thoughts about looking at the analytics properly, using paid media, as Martin said earlier, that kind of stuff. But look first at the content and make sure that it's resonating with what you guys are trying to say and be. Thank you.
I know Sophie said that, to might clarify, but as broad as your audience is, actually people digest things in different ways. So it's about audience segmentation, I think. So, you know, the younger audience, actually, how do they interact with, you know, news or campaigns or that type of thing? And just do a bit of segmentation and think about, okay, so if this is the channel that really communicates to them and that's what they use, actually, who are the talent that are best for that channel? And, you know, and actually CBeebies might be kind of a particular audience. So you get, what's his name, who dresses up in fancy costume, to kind of go and do a visit perhaps. But then, you know, if you've got a slightly older audience that are very au fait with TikTok and social media and that type of thing, Mr. Tumble, that's it. Thank you, Louise. You know, so there is, as broad as audiences are, there is segmentation that you can have. A lot of comms teams, I'll say, well, who's your audience? And they go, oh, the media. And I'm like, you know, we all have a priority of who we think. So, you know, you might want to get into the Times, and that will be a very different person to somebody that you go after to get in the Sun. And you know, so just breaking it down and thinking much more specifically about, okay, they communicate in that way. This is their channel. This would be a really good way to reach them.
Thank you.
From a social media perspective, I think there's that general consensus that TikTok is sort of Gen Z, Instagram, more millennial, Facebook, older demographics. So I think you can start to layer in that, and then what the trends are. Like, you know, maybe on TikTok, there's a way to raise awareness through one of the TikTok challenges. So you can get quite creative in those ways as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. A question that we've had, we've spoken about, I think, sort of elements of it, but we've had this question in a couple of different comments. Obviously we spoke about persistence, if we want to get through to people we want to get through to, but have you got any other advice in terms of making your ask stand out? Have you perhaps received any asks that you thought, oh my God, that's really interesting, that's something that, you know, I'd immediately speak to this person about, or I would immediately consider? Any standout tips?
I mean, I think it's about, you know, as much as you would go to the media and you wouldn't go to a journalist or a media without understanding how they write or what ticks their box. So if you want someone on This Morning and you'd never watched This Morning, you'd kind of be in a disadvantage. So it's similar to approaching talent is making it, and it doesn't have to be, because what you want is a succinct approach, but you need to impress upon the person who's reading it that you understand the person, or you understand how they operate. So it might be, talking about Mental Health Awareness Week, which I've just been on, their theme this year was connecting with nature. So it was about kind of looking at people and kind of going, well, you've spoken about mental health, but actually you've also spoken about being in nature being something that really assists your mental health. So it's, so it's just tying things together, and as quick and dirty as your research might be, it's making it come across as if you understand what that person is. And, I don't know what Dom's opinion is, but in terms of influencers, I find it really difficult to go into a digital first people without having a look through what their posts are and their content is and what are they talking about. If I just went into them and said, everyone's talking about you, and I haven't actually, and it's incongruous with what they're putting out on their channels, you just need to show that you've done a bit of research and you've thought about why that person is the right person to approach.
You'd be surprised at how often people don't do any research whatsoever before contacting a digital first talent. And we even got emails from people saying, and they'd forgotten to mail merge the names, and it'd say "Dear Blogger" at the top, and then the same. That happens all the time. In fact, it's the majority. So if you go into a talent and you've done your research, and like Paul just said, you know what their content's about, you know what they've done, and you can quote them. I loved it when, last year when you got into this situation or whatever, boom, you're already in the top 1% of people that are contacting that talent.
And as Dom says, make sure your emails are adjusted so as much as I do kind of almost a templated ask to some people, it's each email is then tailored so I have key information that everyone needs to know, but then each one is tailored to the person I'm going after. So if you're writing to somebody about, a woman or a female and their talent, then don't go, we'd love his support at the end. I mean, we've all done it, but reread your emails, make sure that you're not doing that mistake, or as Tom says, your mail merge hasn't, you're writing to the right person, you're talking in the right terms, because it's easy done when you're pushing out lots of stuff to just forget. So a lot of time, it's time consuming, but to go through and make sure that you're spending your time to make sure that the person who's receiving that knows it's to them and not to somebody else that you've just sent to before. Tends to be a good way.
If I wanted to really catch the attention of if you're going after one specific talent and they are a YouTuber or a vlogger or they're an Instagram or whatever, or a TikToker, for example, I would talk to them in their language. So make a TikTok video to communicate to them about what you want them to do, or make a YouTube video. We've been approached not that many times, but a few times for people for jobs and things, and they've made YouTube videos about why they would be great to come and work at Gleam, for example. Now, if a charity partner were to approach a talent in that way, I think it would achieve cut through.
Yeah,
I'm
nice.
going to take that down. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, I'm recording it. Don't worry, I'll do a blog afterwards. That's brilliant. Thank you. That's all really great advice, and we've had a lot of that in the chat as well. Everyone's saying thank you so much. There's a question there about whether there's any sort of templates that people could work to. I guess if not templates, any further reading or guides or any other places where we can continue learning about this field that you guys would recommend.
I've appeared on Radio 4's Moral Maze. There actually isn't anything up to date in terms of charity comms or the Institute of Fundraising or anything like that around celeb and digital first talent and working with them. So perhaps we need to put a book together. But just have a look at Google and see what's around and talk to people. There are a lot of people who work with talent, and I'd always say, as much as agents can be seen as scary, or publicists, or as much as they're really busy, actually, if you've got a genuine reason for getting in touch with them, they're likely to respond to you and say, yeah, I can give you some time. So just never be afraid to for an area that you're not familiar with, never be scared to say, look, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Do you have 15 minutes to talk me through how that works? So yeah, so that's what I'd suggest is kind of, there doesn't seem to be a current resource out there, but there's lots of webinars and stuff like that around working with talent. So just keep on, keep the Google going.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's it for all of our questions. Do read the chat, everyone, if you can, because there's actually some really good advice from you all to each other, which is fun to read as well. Veronica's talking about sending pictures of guide dog puppies to warm the hearts of the coldest agent, which I can imagine absolutely would get cut through. Are there any final comments from any of our panelists? And if not, I'd just like to say a massive thank you. So thank you to Paul and Martin and Dom for joining us today and for sharing all of that really, really great advice. Thank you to Kyrie and the PRCA for hosting us and organising all of this. And huge thanks to all of you for coming along. It's great to see so many friendly faces. So thanks very much. Take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you all. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.